Hello, everyone, and welcome to Real Story Group's latest webinar, What is the Future of Web CMS? I'm Tony Byrne. I'm here with my colleague, Scott Simmons. Super interesting questions, Scott. We ask this of ourselves every year. Now, we're not a traditional analyst and advisory firm. If we were a traditional analyst and advisory firm, what do you think we would say about what is the future of Web CMS?
Same old, same old.
Same old, same old. No, we'd say it's epically changing. Like, the future is like headless or something like that, which it definitely is not. Or that the future is like, embedding Gen AI into your web tier, which is probably one of the last places where you want to be doing significant Gen AI just within a particular channel like that. So so let's just start out by answering our own question, and then we can spend the next 28 minutes, 29 minutes, sort of saying how it is that we got there. So here's our take on this: is that there's a near-term answer and a long-term answer. So in the near to mid-term, you really want to get lighter with what we call legless web content management system. So this means kind of avoiding bulky, significant investments in heavyweight, multidimensional web content management systems. Really stop overspending and then focus more on experience integration. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means. In the longer term, I think what we have to say is actually fairly provocative. So the longer term, we often talk about, MarTech 2030. Which is when AI and agents, however overhyped now, are likely to play a major role in our stack. And at that point, really, your web CMS, along with a number of channel-specific tools, is really going to go away. And we all ought to be preparing for that moment as well. And what we're going to be doing instead is assembling bespoke experiences from core content, data, and logic. So so the near term, you really want to get lighter and not make significant new investments in a heavyweight platform that's in one channel. In the long term, web CMS is actually going away. Now, some of you may disagree with us, or you may have questions or comments or anecdotes you want to share. Just want to point out that you can use the questions function in your GoToWebinar control panel, and depending on which version you're at, it's either in the GoToWebinar tab, you'll see a questions tab, or there's a box, a white call out box, speaker box with a little question mark in it, and you can ask questions that way. We'll definitely have time to get back to it. But the conclusion that we're making here, Scott, is always kind of bittersweet for me, because I started Real Story Group back in 2001, actually. Originally, we were CMS Watch, so we covered web content management systems, and we still do today. These are all the different vendors that we evaluate at Real Story Group, laid out as kind of a subway map here. And the web content and experience management line is the blue line, the light blue line. It still has a number of plausible vendors on it. And so it always has kind of a special place in my heart. But the reality is that there's all these other lines here too now, right? And so a MarTech or a digital stack is going to have a number of different capabilities, and we have to kind of see web content management in that context, and in particular, web CMS in the context of a changing stack. So without further ado, let's get into it. And Scott, tell us what we're going to be covering over the next 25 minutes or so.
Sure. Thanks, Tony. So as Tony said, we think the role of the web CMS is fundamentally changing. Not because websites stop mattering, but because the rest of the engagement stack is becoming more important relative to the website itself. First, we'll discuss why web CMS is no longer the center of gravity for digital engagement. Then we'll challenge the DXP story. So for years, the industry pushed bigger suites and bundled functionality, but for many enterprises, that mostly added cost and complexity without truly solving omnichannel engagement. Third, we'll outline what replaces the model, what we refer to as WCM 4.0. In this world, the CMS becomes lighter, more interoperable, and more focused on orchestrating inbound experiences rather than owning every adjacent capability. And finally, we'll close with practical guidance on what organizations should do over the next 12 to 24 months to prepare for the transition without ripping apart everything that you already have. So throughout the session, we'll connect this to several major trends shaping the market right now. AI-driven assembly, reusable content foundations, agentic experiences, and the growing tension between composable architecture and vendors rebuilding suites all over again.
Great. So Scott, before we jump into number one, a couple of quick questions have come up. Copy of the presentation available? Yes, absolutely. And if you're a Real Story Group corporate member, you'll also get access to the recording. Everyone gets a copy of the presentation. Robert, thanks for that question. Tracy's asking, what's the difference between a web CMS and a CMS? It's a great question. We sometimes say web CMS and WCM as the platform itself, and CMS is kind of like the discipline or the practice. They can they reuse them a little bit interchangeably here. We do make a distinction though between CMS and OCP a little bit later, and that is more significant. But first, let's get going with the earlier model of WCMS or web CMS and an emerging model, Scott.
Yeah, sure. So this is an important framing. So for 25 years, the website kind of sat at the center of digital engagement, the digital engagement architecture. Everything revolved around pages, right? Templates, SEO, navigation, publishing, rendering. But now the center of gravity is moving downward into kind of a shared set of foundational services. Content, identity and customer data, and decisioning, right? All exposed via APIs and wrapped in governance. The web becomes like one inbound touch point among many, right? We now have agents, AEO, GEO, paid media, mobile experiences, search interfaces, and conversational interfaces. And they all consume the same foundational components: the content to communicate, the data to know context, and the decisioning logic to tie the two together. So the website still matters, but it's only one of many channels that matter, and it should no longer define the stack.
That's right.
Next.
Yeah.
So if you follow us and have read some of our work, you know that we call this architecture legless. So historically, engagement systems carried their own legs internally, right? Their own content management, their own personalization, their own DAM, their own data models. This made every platform a silo. So CMS vendors with CDPs, ESP vendors with personalization, DAM vendors with business workflow, commerce vendors with search, and none of it interoperates cleanly, driving lots of custom code and complicated frameworks for keeping them all stitched together. Legless architecture makes the engagement layer lighter and pluggable, and the heavy lifting moves into shared foundation services. That's the only way to scale omnichannel experiences and AI effectively. Next.
That's right. The AI thing is becoming huge, and I think a lot of people are saying this without actually talking about the architectural implications, which are really profound. Instead, I think people are vendors, particularly legacy vendors, are taking us still where, Scott?
Yeah, DXP, right? So DXP was never really a future state architecture. It was largely a vendor packaging story, right? So vendors pulled together, they had their CMS, they bolted on personalization, CDP, commerce, portals, analytics, everything under the sun, and often through acquisition. But most enterprises really never wanted one vendor owning all of these jobs. What they wanted was integration, right? They wanted all of this stuff to work together. But instead, they got complexity, overlapping capabilities, massive implementation efforts, and expensive shelfware. And here's the continued irony. The headless vendors who broke away from this model to push composable architectures are now moving in the same direction. They're all starting to become broader experience suites. Composable is slowly becoming composable DXP, right? The same concept, the same problems, just different branding. So if DXP is the wrong answer, what's the replacement? Right? We call it WCM 4.0. The CMS becomes smaller but still important. Its job shifts towards inbound experience direction, experience assembly, web governance, and UX management. Meanwhile, reusable content, personalization logic, and customer context increasingly live elsewhere. The strongest future CMS will be simpler than the large DXP platforms we've become accustomed to. Let's take a look at this. So right now, many vendors are telling customers, AI means you need more of our suite. We think the opposite is true. As foundational services get stronger, so better structured content, consolidated customer data, orchestration, and governance, the CMS itself becomes lighter. The value shifts from how many features does my CMS contain to how well does my CMS participate in the broader stack. Next. So let's get practical. What does the CMS keep in this model? We still keep long form web content, right? There's always going to be some unique content that resides on your site. And there's no reason to pump that content all the way through a large architecture just to get it to pure on a page, right? So there'll always be a need up front for that, as well as page assembly, the site UX and performance and governance, and the publishing workflows. But on the other side, there's a whole series of features that go away from the WCM that it basically inherits from other systems. Reusable content components, customer context, journey logic, translations, product information, structured assets, and any other cross-channel like foundational capability shouldn't be stuck inside the platform. It should be made available to all the channels that need it. So the CMS becomes an inbound experience director. It orchestrates and assembles experiences instead of owning every capability internally. This is a very different architectural role than the content management repositories they started as.
Yeah, and you'll notice on the left, Scott, it's so interesting how light the content management piece is, which is a real kind of throwback. And it's different than the approach that the headless vendors say, and we'll talk about that in a minute, where it's kind of more pure content management. We're seeing more that it'll become more of the inbound experience director, because content management is going to be happening somewhere else for the most important enterprise content.
So one implication of all this is that CMS selection becomes simpler, right? The question shifts from which vendor's suite best fits my architecture to which CMS fits my architecture and inbound experience needs cleanly. What we really need is clean interoperability, strong APIs, reusable foundations, governance, and the ability to evolve the stack over time. So increasingly, we think the market simplifies into three broad patterns. So on the left is the simpler site in a box or CMS plus offering. These are often great fits for leaner organizations, smaller digital teams, simpler operational environments, and companies that mainly need strong inbound web publishing, plus some bundled extras. There's absolutely nothing wrong with these platforms, right? The only risk is simply like eventually you can hit a functional ceiling, right? If your personalization, orchestration, or governance requirements become more sophisticated, right? You're basically buying you have a small set of requirements or a small set of needs. You're buying a small product to fit those. And if you outgrow it, you outgrow it. You might have to look for something else. But most enterprises, we think the center becomes the sweet spot, right? So hybrid headless web content management. This model combines strong authoring, API first delivery, interoperability, reusable content structure, and a lighter weight engagement architecture. But you might say, authoring? Didn't you just tell me that kind of authoring might be pushed into foundational? It definitely will, right? But we're also talking, we're in this kind of bridge area where we're looking at 4.0 as a future kind of activity, but we still need platforms that support us from where we are now to where everyone is going. So this model works very well as companies transition from the older WCM or DXP environments toward the more modular AI-ready stacks. Like the CMS still plays a very important role, but it's no longer trying to own the entire ecosystem. This is probably where most large enterprises should be focusing over the next several years. On the right are the larger toolkits or suite plays. Now, these are environments, they make sense in some enterprises, right? I'm not going to say that we should discount these tools entirely, but you got to remember they have high implementation effort, heavy operational overhead, significant customization, and they come with a lot of what we referred to earlier as DXP baggage. So as AI comes more into play, that baggage will really start to show itself in these larger platforms. So the takeaway here is not small CMS is good and big CMS is bad. The takeaway is the future architecture is less about buying the biggest suite and more about assembling the right stack around the shared foundational services, right? The answer is not bigger CMS. The answer is the right CMS plus the right stack.
Yeah,
So
and
let me pass it back
that's such a
to.
great conclusion there, Scott, because for so long, really for 2 decades, I think a lot of analysts and consultants have been telling companies, well, the bigger and more sophisticated you are, the bigger and more sophisticated CMS you need. And that turned out to be a dark alley for a lot of organizations. You're right that that far right column, the purple column, that there's still a time and a place for it. But I think in our experience, the question really is, when should you exit that platform? For most of you, not all of you, but there's going to come a time where it really doesn't make sense. I think that was on the far right. On the far left, Site in the Box is really interesting category too. We see this a lot for small, mid-sized businesses. Certainly makes a lot of sense. Some players there you could think about would be like WordPress, Progress Software, some of the simpler builds of Drupal. So, that's an interesting and very exciting place in the market. I think there is, however, kind of a functional ceiling, and they may not work quite right with the architecture that we've been laying out here. But there's certainly a case for smaller enterprises for that orange column. So, really great conclusion there. I think the right CMS for the right stack, and it's going to depend a lot on the size and focus of your organization. So that's kind of where we left you in terms of where we've been and where you need to go. Now let's get a little bit more practical about what to do next, including what to think about just for 2026. So we pointed out before that you basically want to stop doing content management in channel. Like, don't do as little content management in the web channel, the email channel, whatever, as you possibly can, because then it's stuck in that channel, and that's not what you want, and that's not what AI wants, and that's not what your customers want. So then the question is, where do you manage content? And at Real Story Group, we have innovated this concept of what we call a content warehouse. And there's times when we've called this an omni-channel content platform. Content warehouse is kind of the logical term, so it might be multiple different repositories and we know some enterprises that have successfully done this with a single repository, which we call an omni-channel content platform, which is really around component management. And so it takes a variety of different content components, which include, of course, assets. So many OCPs come out of the digital asset management or DAM space. Of course, text blocks, very important. Offers and other sorts of data, product information, and to some extent, customer data, perhaps as metadata. And it can push this content or its various derivatives and renditions out to different channels, so that you're working off a common base of content. And it's so interesting because in the data world, this is very well understood, right? That you would have a data warehouse, that some of that warehouse would then be activatable with respect to data, maybe in the form of like a CDP that you could leverage across multiple channels. We're saying, hey, we should be doing something very similar, at least analogous, on the content side. And so that's really what a content warehouse is. And why this matters on the bottom, this is really a big deal. And this was a bigger deal. This was a big deal even before AI. Now it's a really huge deal with AI. Because of course this gives you reuse and trackability, but also it gives AI much cleaner inputs. It allows you to do Gen AI at a lower level, which is going to be cheaper and more effective for you. And it's going to improve your governance and consistency, and it's going to improve your customer experience as well, because you're going to have much more coherent content and messaging across your channels. For sure, channel will be one more contextual input. People may want to consume something differently than an email, than on a website. And so you may need to contextualize or create derivatives of that content. But the core thing is that the core messaging and core assets you're managing in a centralized way and then distributing out. This is really the future. A number of headless web content management systems say that they are actually an OCP, and we don't know really any of them that truly are. For among other things, they may be good with managing text blocks, but they don't deal well with assets, offers, product information, the sorts of customer metadata that you often need. So we tend to see these more coming out of the digital asset management space instead. We've done many webinars on this. I'm not going to belabor the point any longer. You can go back and see and register and get access to some of those recorded webinars, or you can ping us when we give you the contact information. We can share a lot more information about this. But this is conceptually where you want to go. And then the question becomes, okay, Scott laid out this, series of foundation services, content, data, and decisioning. How does that then become a customer experience? And in lieu of a web CMS, right? We said, remember, in the long term, the web CMS goes away. Well, it's going to be a combination of agents and core repositories that are AI enabled to varying degrees. You're going to take in the intent and the context, and part of the context is going to be what channel that person is in. So that may not be the decisive context, particularly if that person is being represented by an agent. So we think of channel today as the most important context. In the future, it's likely to be one context among many. So yeah, we'll get the intent and the context. We'll reach into whatever foundation services we need, along with some agentic workflow, apply in green some sort of design system to then, and with some render logic, to then present an experience. In this case, it's an inbound experience because someone is hitting your website. It could be an agent that's hitting your website. It could be an agentic search engine that's hitting your website. But that's how you create an experience. There's no web CMS needed here. What you have is an enterprise MarTech and digital team that is managing these different 5 buckets here, along with the suitable guardrails: privacy, compliance, brand safety, human review, cost controls. You don't want to do those things individually in different channels. We know this now. That you can light up AI within a channel like web content management, like email, and maybe get a couple quick wins, but you're not going to be able to replicate that success because you're going to need more and more enterprise data and guardrails and other things. And eventually you're going to be recreating this whole thing separately within 10, 12 different channels. That's not going to work for you. So you really want to take an enterprise approach to AI and agentic, and then be able to leverage all those services across whatever channels people and their agents show up in. This is really the only way to meet the future. And one of the, I won't call it victims, but one of the platforms that gets left aside here that's no longer needed, circa 2030, sooner for some of you, later for some others, is going to be a web CMS. You're not going to need it anymore. And so the question is, what do you do in the meantime? We're not saying that you decommission your web CMS today, although we know some organizations that have. We'd say the same thing, by the way, about your email platform, about your loyalty platform, about a number of other things. What you want to do is start redirecting your efforts from this kind of DXP bloat that Scott talked about to more shared foundations. So this is a bit of an energy and resource shift. And you want to avoid your budget getting trapped in an overbuilt WCM or DXP. One more template modification will improve the customer experience. One more customization, which is probably you're going to have to touch any number of different modules just to amp your personalization. That is a 2010 approach to a 2030s challenge here. So instead, where you want to try to shift your budget is to these foundation services. So this could be an OCP, maybe the DAM is the foundation, some sort of content warehouse that has your structured content. Certainly in customer data activation, many of you are already doing a good job at that, could be doing better. Decisioning and optimization, probably with the help of data science and agentic capabilities, which in turn are going to require AI governance and workflows. All of those things need to be thought about at a more centralized tier, even if it's centralized within your marketing team, to invest in those services and start de-investing, uninvesting, divesting, that's the word I'm looking for. Start divesting your WCM and instead really building these foundation services and then starting to light them up. And we see organizations now, lighting these things up. So you might imagine at this point you need some help getting there. And so this is where I'll put in a small plug for Scott and the rest of the team here, which is Real Story Group can be your partner in this effort. We're a different kind of analyst and advisory firm. We don't believe in following the crowd like you see in mystical quadrants. We never, ever, ever work with vendors. That turns out to be a unique model in this space where almost all consultants and analyst firms have agreements with vendors as well as customers, and there's strong conflicts of interest there. We only work on your side of the table to try to make you as a MarTech leader more successful. So if there's any way that we can help you get where you need to go, if any of these diagrams excite you as a possible future, or it seems obvious to you that that's where you need to go, you'll see some contact information in a second. But first, let's talk about something practical, which is really a 2026 action plan for you, the MarTech leader. So you really need to understand where you're at from a WCM level. And we can do that very quickly with you. Where are you? You may be somewhere between 2 and 3. Some organizations have bits of 1 and bits of 2 and bits of 3. Where are you really? And where are you spending money? And where are you applying a lot of human resources as well? And do you really need to be doing all of that? And then identify what you could start, what we sometimes say, moving south in your stack. How do you move resources south in your stack? We sometimes call this Pilates for your stack. Building out a governance model, really clarifying what's enterprise content versus channel content. It's a big deal. Requires a robust taxonomy and other things. Then define right size target, which, as Scott mentioned, could be more hybrid authoring, more open APIs. Beginning to separate out enterprise content and serving that through the web channel, but also serving it through other channels as well. And then carefully think about what an agentic assembly tier looks like. Agentic assembly tiers sounds like it's something really easy and convenient. If you've seen our previous webinars on this, you know it's not. On the other hand, it is where we all need to go to some degree. The extent of human curation and oversight of that is going to vary, and it could be heavy at first. But there are a lot of opportunities here with respect to particularly dynamic or assembly or pre-assembly of much more effective experiences than we are today. So, if you're in the market for a new CMS, I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. What I am saying is you're probably looking at best a 4 to 7 year lifespan for that technology. And so you probably want to get something, as Scott mentioned, on the lighter, more hybrid side. And we've got a lot of advice to offer you there. If you're not in the market for a new CMS, but you're kind of reevaluating your current situation, there is a transition plan that works here. And again, that's something that we can help you with. So this is how you can get in touch or stay in touch with us. Just email us anytime at explore@realstorygroup.com. We publish most of our blog on LinkedIn these days, so you can see a number of articles and diagrams that we've done about this. What larger enterprises and some mid-sized sort of digital heavy enterprises join us as corporate members, and that gets them access to the Real Story Group Stack Leadership Council. So happy to talk with you further about what a corporate membership looks like. And if you're still in the market for selecting some sort of technology, whether it's web content management or any other, we wrote the book on that, so happy to help you with that effort as well. So with that, I wanted to remind you that there's still time to ask a few questions here since we started a bit late. And I see one has come in already from Tracy. So Scott, this is an interesting one. What are you hearing about process versus bottlenecks for creating and updating content to be used by these systems? Do any of them treat content as open source? So I'm not sure about that latter, but if we talk about sort of process, essentially approval processes versus bottlenecks, any thoughts on that?
I don't know. I think the goal of most of these systems is to break down those bottlenecks, right? I mean, the workflow processes that they support have been created to help you move through a process to cleanly get that content approved and published out to the site. Now, that being said, with AI or generative AI in the loop, and those processes contributing to content generation, there's a lot of human in the loop processes, as well as like legal in the loop processes, that are required to make sure that anything being generated is safe to be published out to the site.
Yeah.
And that can create bottlenecks.
Yeah, and I guess, Tracy, the other thing I would add there is that, we see a lot of processes that are baked in less around this sort of choo-choo train formal process, although you need that, particularly when AI is involved, or if you need legal approvals, that sort of thing, but more kind of collaborative processes. And those can get gummed up and slow. I think one of the things that we're excited about AI and agents, at least in the longer run, is the possibility for them to have like these contextual caboose. So when it comes to your turn, they can give you a lot of information, what needs to happen here, if anything. Or you can have more, groups approving and signing off on things. But you will definitely need, if you're going to have this canonical enterprise content at your core in that content warehouse, it will have to be authorized by someone, because that's your serious stuff that you want to capture and reuse and really manage actively. And so it will be important always to still have those approvals, and you'll want to always examine, are these approvals too heavyweight for the value of the content or not? And these are business judgments. Okay, so with that, we've gone 5 minutes over. Thanks everyone for your attention. Great to spend time with you. Our next webinars are going to be, as usual, talking a lot about AI and personalization and agencies as well. You can get some more provocative content by listening to our podcast, which you just go to our website and you'll see we've got about a dozen issues there now. So great to see you all. Always a pleasure. For Real Story Group, this is Tony Byrne and Scott Simmons signing off for now. See you next time.